encounter from 1964's The Twilight Zone aired and then vanished without a trace. America attempted to put the incident out of its mind once it was outlawed and the reels were stored away. However, the true scandal did not even lie in it. Rod Serling's career was on the brink of collapse because he had spent years slipping harmful messages past censors through scenarios involving extraterrestrials and time travel. Now, thanks to the deleted sequences, we can see the true intentions of television's biggest rebel. Storytelling was Serling's passion, and he aspired to tackle weighty topics like racism, war, corruption, and greed. Television in the 1950s, however, did not permit such candor. Censors removed content that would offend viewers, networks shied away from controversy, and sponsors had too much sway. Somebody would always get in Serling's way whenever he wrote anything daring. He made an effort to resist, but the system proved to be too formidable. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The murder of Emmett Till, a black kid of 14 years of age, took place in Mississippi in 1955. They took him from his bed, beat him, shot him, and threw him in a river after accusing him of whistling at a white woman. An all-white jury released his assailants notwithstanding their apprehension. Because it was so horrible, unfair, and hard to turn a blind eye to, the case stunned the country. Directly reflecting Till's death, Serling penned a script for a Southern lynching titled Noon on Doomsday. He felt this narrative had to be told. Television, in his mind, could make people see things as they really were. There was a lot of tearing apart before the show even went broadcast. Executives at the network were in a state of panic as advertisers threatened to cancel financing white nationalist organizations demonstrated, and problems arose. The murder victim was transformed from a black man into an anonymous immigrant, and the location was altered from the South to New England. Everything had been ruined by the time it came on TV. It infuriated Serling. The system had buried his attempt to communicate the truth. He then saw he had to change his strategy. He would encase his true tales in something grander if he couldn't convey them. We found the solution in science fiction and fantasy. They were dismissed by censors. Aliens and time travel stories may have appeared benign at first, but Serling sensed something more sinister was afoot. Without ever uttering a word, he could demonstrate the perils of paranoia, discuss war without referring to actual conflicts, and expose injustice. And he was unstoppable. The concept evolved into The Twilight Zone. Each episode took viewers on a bizarre and unnerving adventure into the unknown, exploring settings as varied as a neighborhood where terrified residents turn on one another, a spacecraft pilot who doubts Earth's existence, and a planet where the most horrific standards of beauty are upheld. Even if the stories didn't feel genuine, the lessons were crystal apparent. With the help of his imagination, Serling finally got his message out, and no one could stop him now. Indeed, the Twilight Zone was not an empty moniker. The military used the term to describe the period between day and night, when perceptions of reality were more hazy. That was Serling's goal all along, to create a fantastical universe where readers could identify with the protagonists and villains and uncover the story's hidden truths in a setting that wasn't entirely fantastical. A number of the most accomplished performers of its day were cast in The Twilight Zone over its 5 seasons. There was a different storyline, character, and performance in every episode, and viewers remembered them all. Rod Serling, the show's creator, was looking for actors who could handle the show's odd and thought-provoking tales, not simply talented actors. William Shatner stood out as one of the most memorable visitors. He was in 2 episodes that went down in history as masterpieces. In the film Nick of Time, he portrayed a guy who discovers a diner's fortune-telling machine. He was intrigued at first, but his interest quickly turned to terror when the machine's prophecies began to come true. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, his second appearance, was an even more horrific one. He portrayed a man who had a nervous breakdown and was sure an alien was trying to hijack his jet while it was in the air. The episode became one of the most iconic in the history of the show due to his increasing terror. His terrified expression as he stared out the window of the jet is etched in my mind to this day. Dr. George T. appeared as the lead in The Encounter, a very contentious episode. A Japanese American and a World War II veteran were stranded in an attic during a storm in the narrative. Their debate escalated from heated to darker as it unfolded. Feelings flared up, secrets came to light, and the past became too much to bear. George T.'s eerie performance made an impression, but the program was so dramatic that it was seldom rebroadcast after its initial run. Robert Redford, long before he became a Hollywood icon, portrayed a mystery soldier in Nothing in the Dark. In the film, he pays a visit to an elderly widow who has lived her entire life worrying about dying. She is so sure that death will knock on her door any minute now that she won't let anyone in. Eventually, Redford's character gains her trust, only to turn out to be her worst nightmare come true. To the contrary, he is warm and welcoming, reassuring her that death is not something to be feared. The episode stood out from the rest because to his performance, which added depth and passion. There aren't many performers who made an impression on the Twilight Zone like Burgess Meredith. His portrayal in Time Enough at Last, one of just 4 episodes in which he appeared, became legendary. His character was a reclusive bookworm who makes it through a nuclear holocaust on his own. Despite his initial sadness, he quickly comes to terms with the fact that he now has an abundance of free time to read. His glasses break as he loses his balance, and he finds himself surrounded by books he can't read. One of the most tragic television scenes ever was the last sight of him sitting in despair. Not only did the Twilight Zone cast seasoned performers, but it also provided rising talents their big break. Early in his career, Leonard Nimoy made many appearances in Star Trek, displaying the understated intensity that would come to characterize his work. Walking Distance is a melancholy tale of a guy visiting the village where he grew up. Ron Howard portrayed a small boy in it before he directed Happy Days, and his career took off. Years before To Easy Rider, Dennis Hopper delivered a spine-tingling performance in He's Alive, portraying a neo-Nazi on the brink of ruin who is haunted by the specter of Adolf Hitler. Carol Burnett, meanwhile, added some lightheartedness to a program that was typically associated with heavier topics in Cavender is Coming. In the episode, Burnett portrayed a troubled lady who had been given a guardian angel who was meant to assist her in making a fresh start. Despite the episode's potential to kick off a comedic spin-off, it never materialized. Nonetheless, Burnett's performance showcased her innate charisma and comic timing, which would subsequently propel her to stardom. Television was quite predictable when The Twilight Zone first in 1959. The majority of programs stuck to a tried-and-true format, airing predictable plots that would appease their advertisers. Rod Serling, however, thought otherwise. He hoped that via airing tales that made viewers question their assumptions about the world, television might inspire them to think critically. By subtly incorporating science fiction and fantasy into his communications, he was able to smuggle social criticism past the networks in ways that no one had done before. As a consequence, viewers witnessed a performance completely new to them. The 156 stories told on The Twilight Zone spanned 5 seasons. With 92 of them written by him or with him, Serling ensured that his vision would live on. In his tales, peculiar occurrences, unsettling environments, and individuals confronted with insurmountable challenges abound. But there was always more going on behind the scenes of intrigue and mystery. Real fears, fear of the unknown, fear of authority, and fear of losing control, were the themes of these stories, not fanciful ones about aliens, time travel, or the occult. Even though it wasn't necessary, the show's ratings were below average. A devoted fan base was formed, and the show went on to win several Emmys, including 2 for Serling's writing. Its influence on science fiction was further demonstrated by its 3 Hugo Awards. It altered the face of television, which is vital. It proved television could do more than just entertain. It could also make viewers think critically about their reality. American Horror Story and Black Mirror were subsequent shows that used horror and science fiction to delve into contemporary fears. Stories told on the Twilight Zone managed to be simultaneously fantastical and utterly familiar, which is what made the show so memorable. The monsters are due on Maple Street transformed a peaceful neighborhood into a psychoanalytic study. A power outage proved that fear itself might be the worst adversary when it caused individuals to turn on each other. The community in It's a Good Life was run by a 6-year-old with supernatural abilities, illustrating how terrible total power can be regardless of who has it. The plot twists that ended each episode made the show renowned. Not only were these unexpected, but they also served as valuable lessons. An avid reader makes it through a nuclear holocaust in time enough at last, where he finds an abundance of free time to satisfy his reading addiction. However, his spectacles shatter right as he is about to savor his new existence. It's a vicious turn of events, but it's also about loneliness and the fact that material success isn't necessarily a guarantee of happiness. Many authors and filmmakers were impacted by this style of narrative. Similar plot twists were employed by films such as The Sixth Sense to alter viewers' perceptions of the stories. As before, Black Mirror reflected real-world worries through the use of bizarre, unpleasant scenarios. Comedy shows like Family Guy and The Simpsons regularly make references to the Twilight Zone, demonstrating how embedded it became in popular culture. The show persisted in its popularity even after its initial ratings peaked. Through repeats, it was able to reach new generations of viewers who weren't even alive when it originally broadcast. A piece of television history was made of the creepy theme music, the disturbing narrative, and the unforgettable endings. The 2019 Jordan Peele-hosted revival of The Twilight Zone brought the show to a new audience after all these years, demonstrating that the subjects explored were not just timely, but universal. However, there were some bumps along the way. One episode of The Twilight Zone aired on May 1, 1964, but no one saw it for over half a century. The Encounter. It depicts an angry World War II veteran and a young Japanese-American guy seeking employment who are both confined to an attic. An innocent discussion escalates into a heated confrontation when a long-forgotten battle memento, a Japanese katana, starts acting strangely. Fenton, the veteran, asserts that he obtained it from a fallen soldier. George T.S. Arthur Takamori listens as Fenton's anger bubbles to the surface. After that, Takamori drops a bombshell. His dad could have aided the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. The show takes a somber turn at this point. The story's twist that Takamori's father betrayed the U.S. is more than that. It perpetuates a negative stereotype. Because of baseless suspicions of espionage, hundreds of Japanese Americans were imprisoned throughout World War II. It was common practice to forcibly remove and treat as enemies many families, like Takamori's. It was extremely insulting to imply that Takamori's dad was responsible for the crime that was used to establish the concentration camps. Quickly, there was a pushback. For decades, CBS had the episode locked away after removing it from syndication. It didn't make a comeback in an SFI marathon until 2016. As a result, George T. had grown into a prominent campaigner, frequently discussing his time spent as a boy in an internment camp. The part he played in The Encounter was a sobering reminder of the positive and negative power of narrative. The episode's intended exploration of war guilt ended up reiterating Takamori's life-defining views. Frequently, Rod Serling would utilize the Twilight Zone to question societal conventions. The airing of The Big Tall Wish on April 8, 1960, a subtle but revolutionary event in television history, made that very evident. In the narrative, a small child named Henry had such faith in an elderly boxer named Bly Jackson that he had a powerful enough desire to alter the course of events. Surprisingly, Bly emerged victorious in his bout. Everything fell apart, though, the moment he questioned the magic. Again, he was a defeated man who could only feel remorse. Though it seemed like any other ghostly story at first look, it actually accomplished something rather unusual for its day. Despite having a nearly all-black cast, the show avoided centering on race. Unless the script dealt directly with racism, black actors were almost never cast in leading parts in 1960s films. In this story, racial tensions were completely absent. The protagonists and antagonists were universally relatable individuals dealing with universally human experiences. This strategy was daring. Unlike other television shows, it portrayed black characters as relatable individuals. People had different reactions to the show. Some thought it was problematic to have a black guy in a starring position, while others thought it was groundbreaking. Even if networks were hesitant, Serling continued to advance television, and the NCP acknowledged this. Subsequent programs such as Star Trek and I Spy maintained this trend, demonstrating that diverse casting could become the standard rather than the exception. As a gentle reminder that the most groundbreaking stories aren't always about magic but about portraying people as they really are, The Big Tall Wish was more than simply a magical tale. I Am the Night, Color Me Black, a very unpleasant episode of The Twilight Zone shown on March 4, 1965. The story starts in a sleepy little village where the sun never comes up. The outer darkness is becoming increasingly dense as an execution of a guy approaches. The town's inhabitants are fueling their own animosity, which is causing the black cloud to grow in size. This isn't only a town-specific mystery, despite appearances to the contrary. It doesn't matter where hatred is prevalent. The darkness is encroaching on all of them. It was hard to ignore the message. At this juncture in the civil rights movement, many Americans chose to ignore the long-standing racism in their nation, despite the fact that demonstrations had taken over the streets and violence had broken out. Watching The Twilight Zone made them look. The increasing nighttime shadows mirrored reality, not only an eerie occurrence. The impact was not cushioned by Serling. It was an unforgiving, disturbing, and blatant episode. That was the intended effect, to make people feel uneasy. No amount of dry facts or dry lecture could have reached its target audience as science fiction could. The last minutes were impactful because they showed that the gloom would persist unless individuals made a conscious decision to change. Following that, a 5-season episode of Living Doll was shown. A young girl named Christy brings a new toy home at the beginning of the story. You might recognize her as Talkie Tina, and she functions similarly to other talking dolls. However, I sense an immediate unease. Eric, Christy's stepfather, picks up the doll, but the doll starts talking in an inappropriate way. "My name is Talkie Tina, and I don't like you." Eric attempts to get rid of the doll, thinking it's a prank, but it keeps coming back. He discards it, and then it turns up again. Nothing he does seems to be able to break it. The more Eric resists, the more intimate it becomes. "My name is Talkie Tina, and you'll be sorry." Eric's unraveling leads to escalating tension. Does the doll actually have life, or is he just hallucinating? As the doll resists, Eric's wrath increases. He is a horrible husband who abuses his wife and stepdaughter badly. He becomes increasingly desperate towards the end. He makes one more effort to destroy it, but his fall from the steps occurs the second he relaxes his guard. Next to his lifeless body, his wife discovers the doll. Talkie Tina says, "My name is Talkie Tina, and you had it coming." The fact that the episode doesn't clarify how Talkie Tina operates, whether she's possessed or it's karma, is what makes it so unsettling. The details leave an indelible impression, while the air of secrecy heightens the terror. Designed to mimic the appearance of authentic Chatty Cathy dolls of the period, the doll was really a modified briquette. Even more unsettling is the fact that June 4, who also played Chatty Cathy, provided the voice for Talkie Tina. A subtle, ominous melody by Bernard Herrmann echoes in the background, heightening the discomfort in every image. Now fast forward to Small Town from the 2020 remake, and the source of the terror is changed. Everything in Jason Grant's new town is in its proper position, and the streets are spotless. The neighbors are kind and helpful. However, something doesn't seem right. Every single item is always accepted without question or alteration. The town seems to be in a perpetual state of frozen motion. An additional scene that was cut would have provided more context. It had Jason conversing with a priest about the peculiar regulations of the town. The episode nonetheless manages to convey its message, one of control and the price of perfection, even in its absence. A darker foundation supports the town's very pleasing exterior. Although everyone plays by the book, nobody truly has any freedom at all. Next, we have Miniature from Season 4, a tale that is disturbing but in a more subdued manner. People don't understand Charlie Parks because he's quiet, awkward, and likes to sit alone at a museum looking at a dollhouse. However, an unusual thing occurs. The little individuals within appear to be fully conscious. He observes a woman sitting at a piano while she plays and responds. Even though no one else notices it, Charlie is certain it's genuine. He keeps coming back. This little inaccessible realm captivates him. Both his job and his interactions with others come to a halt. He begins to cause concern among his loved ones, who fear he is becoming crazy. No one ever finds out in the narrative if Charlie is hallucinating or whether he is really experiencing something special. There is a beginning to blendness between actuality and imagination. Charlie vanishes in the conclusion. The last shot reveals that the dollhouse has been invaded by an extra figure, a male seated beside the piano-playing woman. For years, legal concerns kept this show out of syndication. But when it did return, everyone could see why it had made such an impression. To put it simply, it's sad rather than frightening. Anyone who has ever felt alone or disoriented would relate, and it makes you question whether or not the pursuit of happiness in one's imagination is really that different from the pursuit of pleasure in one's actual life. Paul Douglas was not acting during filming The Mighty Casey, an episode of The Twilight Zone. The majority of his co-workers assumed he had been drinking because of his ill appearance. Everyone assumed he was drunk due to his background, but in reality, he was having a heart attack at work, and nobody noticed. His death occurred on September 11, 1959, a mere 2 days after filming Wrapped. Show creator Rod Serling got a lot of heat. The episode was meant to be a humorous baseball comedy with a hint of science fiction, but Serling couldn't show it as it was because of Douglas's final days. It didn't feel right and didn't fit the story's tone. After CBS declined to foot the bill for a reshoot, Serling stepped in to cover the expenses. Having actor Jack Warden reshoot every scene in which Douglas was involved cost him $27,000. When original director Alvin Ganzer was unavailable, Robert Parrish stepped in to oversee the additional footage. Despite all that had happened, there was still just one view of Douglas, a distant shot of his character McGarry walking away. To pay tribute to the actor without highlighting the tragedy, Serling intentionally left it in. Casey, a robot, becomes a brilliant pitcher for a baseball club that is suffering in the tale itself. But he begins to experience emotions after receiving an artificial heart, and ultimately concludes that baseball isn't his sport. Leaving his managerial position with blueprints that may produce further robotic players, he quits the game to pursue a career in social work, dropping hints that a fully automated squad could eventually dominate the sport. Baseball and robots aren't the main tale. What matters is Serling's commitment to his work and his admiration for those who helped make it a reality. When things became rough, he didn't give up. Instead, he invested his own money to make sure the ultimate result was something he was proud of. The Midnight Sun, a different episode, presented its own unique obstacle. It was a matter of survival this time, not tragedy. The planet Earth has moved closer to the sun in the other universe where this episode is set. The seas are drying up, the heat is intolerable, and civilization is disintegrating. As the temperature inside their New York apartment continues to rise, two women, Norma and Mrs. Bronson, are attempting to stay alive. The authenticity of the heat was important to director Anton Leader. Instead of depending only on CGI, he ensured that everyone involved in the production experienced the anguish they were meant to depict. It was in the summer of 1961 when the episode was filmed. It was already hot on set without Leader ordering the electrical crew to crank up the heat, just enough to make everyone uncomfortable because the studio lacked air conditioning. The result was satisfactory. The strain on Norma and Mrs. Bronson's faces, as well as the perspiration and weariness, were not staged. Although several individuals came dangerously close to passing out from heat stroke due to the extreme temperatures, the end outcome was well worth it. Rod Serling had a gift for writing provocative stories that managed to avoid censorship. Strange occurrences and twisted plot lines weren't the only things that made The Twilight Zone so terrifying. The show also provided a safe space to discuss serious issues like racism, nuclear war, and McCarthyism. The network would have cut him off if he had been more forthright, so he came up with a different approach. The 1960 broadcast of The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street is a prime illustration of this. Everything is quiet and typical in the town where the narrative begins, but then an unusual power outage hits. After that, skepticism sets in, and someone even brings up the possibility that aliens are to blame. Even longtime neighbors are implicated when people begin to accuse one another. The street is completely in disarray by the finish. They didn't need to invade, they only needed to sow a seed of doubt, and the humans ended up destroying themselves. Here's the twist. The actual aliens are observing from a distance. During the Red Scare, when fear and suspicion pitted regular people against one another, the message was very obvious. Wrapping it in science fiction, Serling knew the network would never approve of a story clearly addressing McCarthyism. That manner, it had an entertaining quality while still getting its point over. Another 1961 episode, The Shelter, dealt with the nuclear hoax. The plot centers on a family that has constructed a fallout bunker, an activity that was common among Americans at that period. Their neighbors and friends freak out and beg to be brought inside when they get the alert that an assault is coming. The more panicked you are, the more desperate you get. Vicious violence breaks out between once caring individuals. Damage is done, although no actual assault occurs at this instant. Instead of focusing on the conflict, the episode explores the nature of humanity. Kindness vanishes when terror reigns. During the Cold War, when the United States was being portrayed as a unified front against an external threat, this fiction took a risk. Instead, than concentrating on the enemy, Serling wanted to see how Americans would treat one another in a horrible situation. Sponsors in the network were always on high alert, fearing that the show may say something too provocative to pass muster. As a defense mechanism, Serling drew on science fiction and fantasy. According to his previous statement, "You can put these words into the mouth of a Martian and get away with it." And that's precisely what he did. He didn't use an actual town in I Am the Night, Color Me Black, a work against racism, but rather a town engulfed in perpetual darkness on the eve of execution. For example, in A Quality of Mercy, set during World War II, an American soldier finds himself unexpectedly inhabiting the body of a Japanese soldier, causing the audience to perceive the world through a new lens and challenge their preconceived notions about what they understood. Serling was always challenging himself to speak more without being reprimanded. He proved that the most effective method to express the truth is to encase it in something unexpected, and he did more than simply make a fantastic program. He revolutionized television storytelling.